They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue they have set up. Verse 13, then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, that you refuse to serve my gods and to worship the gold statue that I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made. And when you hear the sound of the musical instruments, but if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace, and what God will be able to rescue you from my power? So, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah refused to bow. They're called out, brought before the king, and now these guys were part of Nebuchadnezzar's advisory team. They were his most trusted advisors. And what's really amazing is that Nebuchadnezzar had already seen God work in their lives. So perhaps that's why instead of immediate punishment, he gave them a mulligan. He said, you know what? I'm going to give you a do-over. Despite his anger, the king says, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. We're going to pretend that the music didn't play and that we didn't see you not bow, but now the music's going to play again, and when the music plays, I want you to bow. And if you don't, you'll be all crispy critters. What would you do? Faith will often put us at odds with the culture around us. Some don't understand our relationship with Jesus. I had a conversation last night with a guy, and we jumped into the theological conversation pretty quick. I said, well, he goes, it's all about the 10 Commandments. I'm like, well, not really. I said, it's all about 2 commandments. Love God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. He goes, I've never quite heard it that way before. And then he offered me some philosophy from Frank Zappa, and I'm like, okay. Apparently he's a big Frank Zappa fan. But, so faith will often put us at odds with the culture around us. And what'd you do? Some won't understand your relationship with Jesus. They don't understand why we live the way we do, why we do things, and why we don't do things. And standing up for Christ might lead to criticism, rejection, even suffering. Let's face it, there's a cost to following Jesus. Jesus speaks to his disciples and he tells the crowd in Mark's gospel, then calling to the crowd to join his disciples, he said, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on your life, you will lose it. If you give it up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? In other words, is it worth bowing to the idols of culture if, in the end, we lose what matters most? And so let me ask you a question before we move on. Am I prepared to face the cost of standing for Christ? Am I prepared to face the cost of standing for Christ? So what was Hananiah's, Mishael's, and Azariah's response? Verse 16. Now this gets really interesting here. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. How many times do we try to defend God? Or how many times do we try to defend ourselves in God's place? He said, we don't need to defend you. We don't need to defend ourselves. We've got God on our side. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. Is that a bold statement or what? If you throw us into the furnace, our God will save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. How many would have that kind of boldness? I'm not sure I could say that. Man, I'm facing the fiery furnace. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Their response is one of faith. Our God is able, but even if he does not, we will never serve your gods or worship them. They've taken a stick and they've drawn a line in the sand. We are not going to worship anything but the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is faith without any conditions. This is trusting in God no matter whether he delivers us or not. Much like 1956, Jim Elliot and 4 other missionaries. They were trying to reach the tribes in Ecuador, the Aka. Their name basically meant the savages, or at least that's what we called them. The tribe was known to be hostile, matter of fact, even cannibalizing members of their own tribe. But the men believed that sharing Jesus was worth the risk. And so they made friendly contact, dropping gifts, learning the language, praying. Eventually, they landed on a sandbar. They called it Palm Beach, near the village, hoping to meet face to face. And initially, there was some contact, and there's some overtures made, but there on that day, those 5 missionaries were speared to death. But guess what? Their story didn't end there. Their families later returned to the very people that had taken their loved ones' lives, bringing forgiveness, love, and the gospel. Many, including the killers, and there's a fascinating video I really need to show you. It's a Stephen Curtis Chapman video, and he actually brings Steve Saint, who is one of the children of his father was Nate Saint, the pilot. He brings Steve Saint, and he brings out Minkai, who actually speared his father to death. And they're there on stage telling a story of forgiveness. It's absolutely incredible. Many of those men, even the ones who killed the missionaries, eventually came to Jesus. Jim Elliot writes this in his journal. You've probably heard this saying before. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. True faith doesn't make deals with God. It says, no matter what, I'll trust you. So let me pause again and ask you another question. Is my faith based on the outcomes, or is it based on God's unchanging character? Let's continue. Verse 19, Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah that his face became distorted with rage. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. And then he ordered some of the strongest men in his army to bind up Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them in the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. Verse 24, but suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," he replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men unbound, walking around the fire, unharmed, and the 4th looks like the son of a god." Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah stepped out of the fire, and then the high officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Has anyone ever been around a fire? You know, you've all been around the campfire, and when you come away from the fire, you smell of smoke. These guys didn't even smell of smoke. What a miracle, right? Nebuchadnezzar was furious, 7 times hotter, and had him thrown in, fully clothed. Moments later, he jumps to his feet. Wait a second. I thought we threw 3 men in the fire. Why are there now 4 men? The 3 that we threw in, plus there's a guy who looks like God. This reminds us this morning that God's presence often shows up most clearly in the fire, not outside of it. I don't think there's one person here, including myself, who enjoys trials. Trials are not fun. But when they come, the one thing that we can say as believers is that we can trust God in the fire. God is with us in the fire. So the question is where do I need to trust that God is with me in the fire right now? What kind of trials are you going through right now that you need to say, I need to trust God? So let's finish up the story. Verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise to the God of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own. Therefore I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they will be torn limb from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this. Then the king promoted Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. How cool is this story? Like, how cool is this story? Yeah, I know. Actually, I remember there was an old children's musical many years ago. It was called It's Cool in the Furnace. This is a cool story. Now, that's a plot twist, isn't it? Just minutes ago, Nebuchadnezzar was furious, his face distorted with rage, but now he's praising the very God that he defied. And I think it's interesting. So I'm going to say something. Yeah, I'll get here in just a second. The same men he sentenced to death are now being promoted. The king asked, and in the scriptures it says, what God, with a lowercase g, what God can rescue you from my power? Yeah, the king who said, what God can rescue you from my power, now declares there is no God, still small g, who can rescue like this. And here's the thing. Babylon was a polytheistic culture, just like Rome, and just like the Romans, just like the Greeks. And you know what? Most of these places, you know, whether that's what got the Christians in trouble in the first century, is that Rome really didn't care that you worshipped another god, but it's when they said, "Oh, you worship what you call the only God." That's what usually got people in trouble. That's why people ended up burnt to the stake, was because there's like, no, you say there's only one God, and King Nebuchadnezzar was like, well, okay, hey, your God did something pretty cool. I think that's a pretty cool thing. So it's not like he said you must now worship their God. We just need to add their God to all the rest of our gods. And here's the truth. When we stand for God, it becomes a witness. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah didn't just survive the fire. they revealed God's glory. And so that's the question. When we go through a fiery trial, can we want to do more than just survive it. We want to reveal God's glory in it. We want to be unashamed in the trial. And so let me ask you 3 questions this morning. Who is in your life that needs to see someone take a bold stand? Who might be encouraged or even